today's session, we will focus on developing OData web service using create entity method. Developing OData web service using create entity method. Create entity method is used to insert data. The main purpose of create entity method is used to insert data. Create entity method contains two parameters. One is IO data provider and another is ER entity. Create entity method contains two parameters. One is IO data provider, another is ER entity. IO data provider will accept input record from front-end app. It can be UI5 or Fiori. IO data provider is responsible for accepting input record. That record can have any number of values. But ultimately, it will help you to accept input record from the front-end app. And ER entity is another parameter which will send output record to the front-end app. It can be UI5 or Fiori. These are the two important parameters of create entity method, and you can use it to insert data. So how to do this? Step 1. Open your OData service project under SEGW transaction code. Step 2. What you can do is you can create one separate entity type and separate entity set for this functionality. You can create entity type and entity set with ABAP structure. I want to use Z user info. That is, you can just right click data model, import DDIC structure, and just provide entity type name, for example EMP. I want to use entity type name as EMP, and I want to import the fields from Z user info table. And create entity set that becomes EMP SET. So you have to select checkbox to do that. You can select one checkbox in order to create entity set, and entity set becomes EMP SET because entity type is EMP. And just click on next here. Select the fields. You can click next. Select key field. For example, I just want to use user ID as a key field, then finish. So this is a routine procedure for creating entity type and entity set under data model. So I'll try to use entity type EMP, entity set for insert, update, delete functionalities. For insert, delete, update, I will utilize EMP as entity type, EMP set as entity set. Now step 3, generate runtime artifacts by selecting red color icon. Step 4, open data provider extension class. That is DPC extension class. Place cursor under create entity method of EMP-SET. We are trying to use create entity method of EMP-SET entity set. And you need to redefine that method. Implement below code. So I can implement the functionality here, save and activate. So let me do that up to step 4. I'm selecting SCGW. Under SCGW, you can see this is our project, and these are the existing entity types, entity sets. Let me take one separate entity type and entity set to deal with insert, delete, and update functionalities. In today's session, we will focus on how to insert the data. So you can right-click data model, import DDIC structure. You can select change option. And here we are providing EMP. I'm just using Z user info as database table to import the fields, and I'm selecting checkbox to create entity set. Now I want to select all the fields here. I want to fill all these values while inserting the data. So I can select all the fields, finish, and here select at least one field as key field. I want to make user ID as key field. Only one field I want to make it as key field, that is user ID. Now you can see we are able to get entity type as well as entity set. EMP is entity type, EMP set is entity set. And entity type contains all the required fields. There are 7 fields here. Now what you need to do? artifacts so that latest metadata will be updated. Runtime artifacts are already generated, but you need to click on red color icon again to regenerate runtime artifacts so that latest metadata will be updated. We have created one more entity type, one more entity set. So the metadata of these things has to be updated, and it will be updated if you regenerate runtime artifacts. So just let me click on this. Now you can see they are regenerated. Now what you can do is you can go to DPC extension class. Go to DPC extension class. Now under DPC extension class, if you closely observe, under DPC extension class, if you closely observe, there is create entity method for EMP set entity set. There is create entity method here based on EMP set entity set. You can click on change. You can click change and place cursor inside that method. And try to redefine that method. Now you can see we are getting these parameters and we are getting method, end method for implementation. So if you closely observe this, there is one important parameter, that is IO data provider. For accepting the entire record as it is, you can use this. And we can use ER entity, that is for sending the output if you want. You can send output if needed by using ER entity. Input record is captured by IO data provider. ER entity can send output to the front end if any. And these parameters will work with respect to the front end, UI5, Fiori or .NET, PHP, etc. And here, under create entity method, you can write your functionality as per your requirement. But here, IO data provider and ER entity, these two are important parameters. So we have to write that code under DPC extension class. Now let me write the code here. So first what I'll do is I'll try to declare one work area. Type ZCL MPC class, and I want to refer with table structure EMP. can see that table structure EMP. I'm trying to declare work area by referring to MPC class table structure EMP. And I want to use parameter IO data provider. IO data provider, I want to use this. And on that I can call a method like read entry data. On IO data provider we can call method that is read entry data. And here we can go for importing ES data into work area. So whichever record comes from the front end that is captured inside work area here. Whichever record comes from the front end app, that entire record is captured into work area with the help of IO data provider. Now what you can do is you can use your insert functionality here. Insert into so-and-so database table, that is Z user info table, and values from work area. We are inserting data into this Z user info table by taking the values from work area. And if you want, you can use commit work. You can use commit work statement. So that is to commit the transaction. But how this code will work with respect to front end, let us analyze that. Let me just activate this. So here, let us understand how this functionality will work. Now there is implementation inside create entity method. So this is a code we have written here. And this is the implementation part we have implemented inside SAP OData Web Service. But we need to deal this OData service from SAP UI5 or Fiori frontend. And in SAP UI5 Fiori frontend, we can take something like this, a screen with input form. And you can provide something like user ID as input, first name, last name, email ID, country, phone, salary, etc. And then you can create one button here that is submit. You can create one button. So technically, we can accept input by using input form. From end user can provide any number of values for that record. Ultimately, that record values are captured by OData service. So you can create a form like this in the front end, and you can create one submit data button here. So what happens is all the values whichever you provide in the front end All these values are accepted by OData service, and those values will come to this work area because of IO data provider parameter. So input form can have n number of values, so that entire record provided inside that input form will reach this work area. And from work area, what we are trying to do is we are trying to insert the database table. We are inserting data into database table and we are committing the transaction. We are using insert statement inside this. So the point here is whichever values comes from the front end, all those values will reach this work area. Now you can do whatever you want, but what I have done is from work area we are trying to insert into database table. So this is a basic diagram that should be on your fingertips in order to capture the entire record into create entity method. So this will indicate the data flow between UI5 Fiori frontend and OData service. And we are taking the help of IO data provider parameter of create entity method. We are making use of IO data provider parameter of create entity method. And we are trying to insert the data by taking the values into work area by using insert statement. So let me just save this. But if you want, you can also send a message to the front end. After insert functionality is success, you can send a success message to the front end. Or you can send a failure message to the front end. Based on the transaction, whether it is success or failure, so we can send a message, success message or a error message, that we can do it in the coming days. How to send a message to the front end? We are going to do it in the coming days. I'll explain. There is 3 lines code that we are going to understand later. But as of now, we are just taking the data and we are inserting the data. Now let me activate. You can go back. Okay, so you can go back. Now we need to test the service. But before that, let me copy this code into our node file. Let me copy that code into our node file which we have written. Now step 5. service. If you are accessing this service from front end directly, then you can consume that service, no problem. But if you want to test this functionality through gateway client, then you also need to implement get entity method for testing purpose. If you want to test this service directly with gateway client, then you have to implement get entity method also along with create entity method. This is just for testing purpose. So what we'll do is try to open data provider extension class. Click change. Place cursor under EMP set, that is get entity set method or get entity method. I want to implement get entity method. This is just for testing the service from gateway client. And redefine that method. Implement below code. So, how to do this? So, let me do that here. You can go back. You can go to get entity method of data provider extension class. Place cursor here and click on redefine. Click on redefine, and you can see for this method there are two important parameters, IT key tab and ER entity. This method I've already explained on Wednesday. I've already explained how to implement get entity method. The same type of code we are going to write again now. So first, let me take work area key tab, type IWBEP SMGW name value pair. And you can use read table IT key tab into work area key tab, index 1. So that means this is going to capture user ID value. Index 1 refers to user ID field in this case. And here I just want to implement select query from Z user info table into corresponding fields of ER entity, which is responsible for sending the output. ER entity is responsible for sending the output to the front end. IT key tab is responsible for accepting the input. ER entity is responsible for sending the output. And I want to use where clause on user ID field by passing work area key tab hyphen its value. Work area key tab hyphen its value, we are passing it to where clause of select query. So this code is optional if you are directly accessing that service from the front end. But if you want to test the service directly in gateway client, then you have to implement this for testing purpose. So let me just explain the data flow of this functionality here. I've already explained, but let me just repeat. Those who missed on Wednesday, you can just analyze this. This is our OData service implementation. this has to be done with respect to SAP UI5 Fiori frontend. And in the front end, what we can do is we can create one input form. For example, enter user ID. And I can create one button, that is get data button, and you'll get output data something like first name, last name, email ID, country, salary, etc. So you can create one input form as well as output form. One is for accepting input, another is for receiving the output. Input form, under that you can accept, for example, user ID, get data button, and you can expect your output data here. So whichever values comes from the front end, that is captured into work area key tab here. The value coming from, that's a key field. The key field value coming from front end is captured into this work area key tab. With the help of IT key tab parameter. And we are passing this work area key tab hyphen value in a where clause of our select query. But here we are executing select query and we are sending our output data to the front end by using ER entity parameter. ER entity is the parameter which is responsible for sending the output to the front end. This is responsible for sending the output to the front end. So you can make this code complex by applying some conditions, validations, etc., etc., same like your normal app. But here, IT key tab is responsible for accepting input. ER entity is responsible for sending the output. So this method implementation is mandatory if you want to test create entity method directly from gateway client. Otherwise, this is optional. If you're accessing the service directly from the front end, actual application, then this method implementation is optional. So, okay, let me copy this code. Activate. So this is a code we have implemented. Now step 6. We need to open service maintenance, open gateway client, and test the service. So this method is activated. You can go back, open service maintenance, and open gateway client. not doing here. Okay, whatever. So that is service registration. That is just as registration. Now what we do is, let me just check where exactly our coding is implemented. Let me just check before testing. Create entity and get entity. The code is implemented in today's session under create entity and get entity. Now I can go to service maintenance. After registering the service, if the service is already registered, you need not do it again. So now you can directly go to gateway client, and here you need to focus more on testing procedure. Testing is not so easy here. So first what you do is, it is better to clean up cache from both systems to get consistent results. We have added a new entity type, new entity set. So it is better to clean up cache on both systems here. Now you can go to entity sets, and here you can see EMP set. EMP set, we are trying to use it. And before inserting the data, I just want to get one sample record. I want to get one sample record, so you can pass user ID, for example, 1001. I want to get sample record along with sample XML format so that I can go for insert operation. So first let me execute here. Now you can see we are able to get output record. We are able to get output record for so-and-so input. And we are getting output record because of get entity method execution. Because of get entity method execution, we are getting the output here. For example, 2005 as user ID. And we are using get option. Get option will execute get entity method, and you'll get the respective output record here. Now, what I want to do is, I want to insert the data by taking the sample XML format. By taking the sample XML format, I want to insert a new record. So let me open database table. For verification, let me open database table. So under this table, there are 101 records here. There are 101 records here at this point of time in the database table. So what we can do now, we can go to gateway client. If you want to use insert functionality from gateway client, you have to copy this sample XML format. If you want to copy the sample XML format, you can use as request option. Use as request option. So this sample XML format is copied from HTTP response to HTTP request. You can see it is copied here. From right side, it is copied to left side. XML sample format is copied from HTTP response to HTTP request. Now what you can do is, after copying, remove this user ID from the URL. Remove user ID from the URL. And what you do is select post operation here. Select post operation in order to execute create entity method. And left side, if you closely observe, left side, these are the values. So these are the values and this record is already existing. But what I want to do, I want to insert a new record. So you have to change the values here. Side under HTTP request. I want to use, for example, 0005 and something like Sagar Kumar, and let me provide some phone number. Country US 77,000. So if you closely observe, this is a new record now. The new record values are provided inside XML format between begin tag, end tag. Between begin tag, end tag, the values are provided here. Now you can use your post operation and execute the service. If the service implementation is success and if the service is properly executed, you will get status code 201 with message as created. You can see that. If the operation is success, you'll get 201 success message and you'll get the reason as created. So 201 is a success status code for insert functionality here. 201 is a success status code for your post operation, that is create entity method. So what is the proof? What is the proof whether the record is really inserted or not? So if you want the proof, you can open database table and refresh. When you refresh, now you can see this record is newly inserted into database table. From database table, we are trying to open this record. So record insert is successful here. You can see that. Let me insert one more record, 0007. Okay, let me provide one more record here. For example, 0007, Satish Kumar, and country US 88,000. So this is a new record now. Select post operation, execute the service. Now again you are getting created message. This is a default message here with 201. 201 is a success status code for post operation for executing create entity method. And here, what is the proof whether the record is inserted or not? You can open database table, refresh. Now you can see one more record is inserted here. Now there are 1 or 3 records. And Satish Kumar, this record is newly inserted from gateway client via OData service. So, okay, let me write the procedure and I'll repeat that once again. Open service maintenance, open gateway, open service maintenance, open gateway client for testing the service. First, select EMP SCT entity set. And use get option and execute the service. Select EMP set, get entity set. Sorry, EMP set is our entity set here. Use get option, execute the service. Why we are doing this? This is just to fetch one sample data with sample XML format. Our intention is for insert functionality, but why we are fetching the data? We are fetching the data just to get the sample XML format. Now what you can do is, let me go to Gateway Client, select Entity Set. So for this functionality we used EMP set and provide URL with user ID equal to, for example, I want to get one sample record, for example 0005. That's a sample record. I want to get sample XML format. So use get option and execute the service. Now we are getting the sample output record here. And we are getting the sample output record just because of a get entity method execution, because we are using get option here. So you can use this. EMP set is our entity set, and we are fetching the data for so-and-so user ID by selecting get option and execute the service. Here, get entity method is executed because of get option. Here, get entity method is executed because of get option. One more note, we get sample XML format with data. When we execute get option, for executing get entity, we are using get option. So ultimately we get sample XML format with respect to output data. Now, what you need to do? What you need to do after getting this, you try to remove this URL. I mean to say, you have to remove this user ID from the URL. Try to remove user ID from the URL. And try to select use as request option. There is a button in order to copy HTTP response to HTTP request. So what you need to do is select use as request. Now XML format is copied from HTTP response to HTTP request. Now what you need to do is select post option here, or first change the record. Let me provide, for example, something like 0010. 0010. I'm providing new record values here. Kiran Kumar, country US, salary 99,000, and try to remove this user ID from the URL. Select post option here and then execute the service. Execute the service. Now you can see we are getting a message as 201, that is a success status code of create entity method. Now what is a proof? You can open database table and refresh. Now you can see that new record is inserted here. 0010 Kiran Kumar, country US, salary 99,000. So that record is successfully inserted into database table. So let me explain this. first what we are trying to do, we are trying to use this URL. We are trying to use this URL. And we are using get option initially. We are using get option initially, and we are getting output record. We are getting output record here. So this is just to fetch sample XML format. Initially, we are selecting get option to get sample XML format with sample data. But later, what we are trying to do, we are trying to select use as request option here. We are selecting use as request option. So what will happen is, this is copied from this HTTP response is copied from HTTP response to HTTP request here. XML format is copied from HTTP response to HTTP request. After that, what we are trying to do is, we are trying to remove this. We are trying to remove this from the URL. Remove just user ID from the URL. This one. Just remove user ID from the URL. And what we are trying to do, we are trying to provide new record values here. We are providing new record values here. In XML format between begin tag, end tag. Provide the complete new record values. After providing new record values, what we are trying to do is, we are selecting post option in order to execute create entity method. After this, select post option to execute the service. So if post operation is success, you'll get a message as something like created. So we have to execute this twice. One for get option, one for post option. You have to execute this twice. So whichever is in red color, whichever is under red color box, that is ultimately to get the data with sample XML format. And whichever is available with something like violet color box, that is just for executing insert functionality with post option to execute create entity method. So let me just save this. Testing get entity method and create entity method. From gateway client. When you're testing from gateway client, the procedure looks a little bit complex. This is how you need to do it. So let me copy this. After getting sample XML format, with the data, what you do is, now select use as request option. Why we need to do this? We have to use as request option to copy XML format from HTTP response to HTTP request. Why we are using use as request option? We're using use as request option just to copy XML format from HTTP response to HTTP request. Then under service URL, remove user ID equal to something like 0005. We have used to fetch the data with sample at XML format, but later you try to remove this before inserting. Provide new record values under HTTP request. Provide new record values under HTTP request. That is left side of gateway client. For example, you can provide like this. So you can just provide new record values, something like this. Make sure that the record is not available. Make sure that the record is not existing with so-and-so user ID. So try to insert a new record with all the values. Now what you need to do, you have to select post option to execute the service. Now select post option in order to execute the service. Note, you will get 201 success status code if insert operation is success. You will get 201 success status code if insert operation is success. So that is the entire procedure which we have implemented. But let us understand two important things here. When we select get option, in this service, get entity method is executed. According to the framework, when we select get option, get entity method is executed. When we select post option in this service, create entity method is executed according to the framework. So according to today's service, get option will execute get entity method and post option will execute create entity method. If get option is success, then we can get 200 as success status code for get entity method. If get option is success, then we get 200 as success status code. Automatically you'll get this for executing get entity method successfully. If post option is success, then we can get 201 as success status code. for create entity method. If create entity method is successfully executed with post option, then you'll get 201 as success status code. So these are some of the points which we need to remember in this particular session. I'll stop. In the next session, we will concentrate on put option for updating the data. In the next session, we will try to focus on put option to execute update entity method for updating the data. Then we will understand some more basics. But as of today, according to today's service, these are the 4 basic points you need to remember.